everyone. This is Evita Duffy and Sean Duffy here at From Z to X, a new podcast from the Federalist where we talk about pop culture and politics. But today we're going to be focusing on politics because it is after the election and that's big news. So first we're going to talk about some vote anomalies in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, where we're from, Wisconsin. And then we're going to talk about Latinos and how they performed with Donald Trump and you know what can explain how those results turned out. So
a strictly political show today, recap on what happened in the election.
Mm-hmm.
And we haven't seeded anything yet. We want to make sure that every legal vote that was cast is counted,
mm-hmm.
but want to make sure there was no shenanigans at play. And to that point, let's talk about Milwaukee. And you wrote an article for the Federalist about what you saw in Milwaukee. Tell the podcast listeners what you saw.
Right. So the Federalist asked me to write a general article about Wisconsin. And as I was looking into Milwaukee, which has a history of voter fraud and some issues, I found that what was really interesting is the way that Obama did in 2008 in Milwaukee County was different than Biden. That Biden outperformed Obama in Milwaukee County, which is very odd because Milwaukee County and Wisconsin in general came out in droves to vote for Obama. He did extremely well in Wisconsin, especially in Milwaukee County. And so if you look at the city of Milwaukee, you can see that the population has remained pretty stagnant. If anything, it's decreased slightly over the last decade. And so, their voter registration has gone down from 2008 to now. And so you can see that actually Biden did get less votes than Obama in Milwaukee, the city, but in Milwaukee, the county, he got more votes than Obama. And he ended up actually outperforming him in the percentage of votes. And so it's really, it's an odd occurrence. It's not something that we would expect, especially considering two things. One, the get out and vote initiative that Obama had, the excitement around Obama versus Biden, who has not been able to really inspire anyone to go out to see his rallies. I mean, his jokes about people seeing him and there only being 7 pumpkins and 12 people that show up. And then the door knocking, the get out and vote initiative that's been available due to COVID-19. And then also some racist, past remarks that Biden has made that makes him, not necessarily the most desirable candidate for Wisconsin's most populous Black county. So with that, I wanted to take it over to you and take what are your thoughts on this?
So first off, if you go back to election night or the morning of Wednesday, what Milwaukee County did, and we knew this was going to happen. We understood this when people voted on election day. Milwaukee County then counted those election day voters. Once they were done counting those voters and turning those numbers in, they then turned to the absentee, the mail-in ballots, and then they counted those and had a big data dump at like 3:00 in the morning on Wednesday morning. And that's when Donald Trump went from the lead to behind. Now, we knew those votes were going to come in as Republicans in our state. It was a bit shocking.
We knew they were going to come in as Republicans. We knew they were going to come in as Democrat votes.
Well, no, we knew those votes were out there in Milwaukee County.
Right.
We knew that they were counting 160,000 ballots. And we knew it was going to be close because if Donald Trump continued to get 26% of the vote like he was getting up to that point, he was going to win. He got a really low percentage of those votes. And to your point and to your article, I think it begs the question, think back to 2008. Barack Obama had the greatest campaign effort seen in the history of American politics. I mean, he was a community organizer. We kind of laughed at him for that, but he organized people. He knocked on doors. Yeah. He energized the African-American community. He was going to be a historic figure, the first African-American elected to the presidency. And people were totally organized and energized about this candidate. And to think that in Milwaukee County, as you mentioned, a county that really hasn't changed that much in size, that Joe Biden, 12 years later, with zero organization, zero door knocking, zero ground game, would have got more votes than Barack Obama doesn't make a lot of sense. Now, in Dane County, that's where Madison is. It's a very liberal area. Yeah. It's a growing area. We thought that's really possible because it's expanded and it's very liberal. We knew those votes were coming in and they were going to have a very high percentage of votes compared to registered voters. But Milwaukee didn't make a lot of sense on that front, which is the point of your article. And if I can just make one last point, some people have got this wrong as they've looked at Wisconsin. They've looked at how many people are registered to vote and then how many people voted on election day. What the observers aren't taking into account is we have same day registration. So the registered voters is the number that you have on the Monday before the election. But as people come in, and you might have had 15 to 20% of some counties, people registering that day in voting. And so that wasn't always a good gauge to see whether there was fraud or shenanigans. But I think your article, to point out the difference between Obama and Biden, I think makes a really strong point that we should look at what happened in Milwaukee. And was this a fair vote? Because as Republicans, if we lose and the vote is fair, we go about our business and we come back and we work hard to win the next election. But if we're cheated in an election because of unfairness, that it wasn't every legal vote that was cast was counted, but illegal votes were counted, or ballots without real people behind them, that's a problem that I think we want to look at, and our state legislature is going to start to look at that, as well as the Trump campaign.
Yeah, I think you made a great point about Dane County, and that Dane is growing, and they have a ton of students that live there because it's where Madison, the university, is. And so I think that the main point about Milwaukee County and why this story is so important is because their population has remained stagnant. The city has decreased, and the county has remained literally the same in the last decade. So how do we explain this?
Yeah, and again, that's why we want to dig into the numbers. And does the result change in Wisconsin? I don't know, but we want to make sure that for future elections, if there were anomalies, we want to be able to fix them. Can I make another point on this issue? We don't really know the turnout yet and what percent of the African-American vote Donald Trump got. I've heard conflicting numbers. Mm-hmm. Some analysis have said Donald Trump has done twice as well with African-American women. He went from 4% to 8% in some areas. Also, I've heard that he's gone from the low teens to the high teens with African-American men. Mm-hmm. I've also heard that in 2008, he had 8% of the vote of African-Americans in total. And in this election, he had 8% of the vote.
Oh, you mean in 2016?
In 2016, yes. Yeah. Thank you. Thank God Evita's here to correct me. And I think the question is, once we look at what were the vote totals from the African-American community, I think it's going to be instructive for some future Republican candidates, because Donald Trump, whatever you think about him, worked really hard for the African-American vote. And again, and you've heard this 1,000 times, but he funded historically Black colleges. He did criminal justice reform. When Joe Biden actually did the 94 crime bill, mm-hmm. Donald Trump helped take young African-American men out of prison. In the tax reform bill, he made sure there were opportunity zones, so there would be incentive to make investments in minority communities, in African-American communities. You looked at the economy before COVID, and it was amazing for everybody, from white, Black, brown. Everybody did really well. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and I think that's a good segue into how did Latinos do? Because the Trump administration has had a big get out and vote effort. They had Black Voices for Trump and all these other things that you listed. And they also have had, I think, a big get out and vote for an appeal to the Latino community. But I would say that it's probably not as, and it's just my observation, that it's not as robust as maybe the Black Get Out and Vote initiative has been. And that might be something worth investing in for Republicans, because Latinos actually, not just Cuban Americans, but Cubans, of course, voted in droves for Donald Trump, and he did actually a lot better than he did in 2016 among a lot of Latino communities. And so that's something to really take note of. And so I was going to ask you, what do you think? What do you think is the cause of this? Why are we seeing this outperformance from 2016?
Yeah, so I think if you look at Florida, I believe it was Miami-Dade, the most Democrat county in Florida. Mm-hmm. Donald Trump did about 10 points better in this election than he did in 2016. And that's because there's a lot of Cubans there. There's a lot of Venezuelans there. And Donald Trump and the Trump campaign did a very good job of talking about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, did a great job of talking about Bernie Sanders and socialism. They ran ads using Joe Biden's words of, "I'm going to be the most progressive candidate in the history of America." And then they would play in Spanish clips of Chavez in Venezuela, talking about being the most progressive candidate ever in Venezuela, right? And same thing with Cuba, and those dictators, and using that language that Joe Biden was using himself. And I think that turned off a lot of Hispanic voters, and especially those who have come from countries that have a history with communism, right? And by the way, we mentioned before the impact of grassroots campaigning. Republicans did that along the I-4 corridor in the Orlando area. They got a lot of the Puerto Rican voters as well, and it was that effort asking people for their vote, and they were rewarded with those votes. And I think a lot of the community wants our strong economy. They don't want handouts, they want opportunity. And Donald Trump was offering opportunity to this community and did really, really well. But my question maybe for you is, that's Florida. And again, that's Venezuela and Venezuelans and Cubans. But how about, Mexican Americans? If we look to Texas or to Arizona, other areas of the country that have a big Hispanic population, how the president did.
I think that your point is great about, wanting opportunity. That's why most of these people have come here. They come from really, problematic places. There's a lot of issues, and not just with communism, but just opportunity in general is not able to be found in a lot of these Latin American countries. And so when you have one party preaching socialist ideals and another one saying, hey, we're going to give you the opportunity to make it in America, I think that that's really appealing for a lot of Latinos. And I think that if we made that appeal, if we let them know this is what we're about, we're going to see a lot more than just Venezuelans and Cubans coming over. And we did. Trump did do better with a lot of different Latino communities, and versus 2016 versus this year, we can do better than that. I think that what we're offering is really what they came for. What they came for is the American dream, not some socialist ideal.
Also what I think Trump did, and this is counterintuitive, but usually what Democrats do is they get Republicans in the immigration trap, right? Let's only talk about immigration. Well, the Hispanic community cares about that, but it's about the number 4 issue. They care about opportunity and taxes, and wage growth. They care about their families. And then at a lower level, they care about immigration. And Donald Trump, talking about building the wall and lawful immigration and only good people coming in, he blasted through the immigration conversation and was talking on the other issues that really matter to the community that most Republicans don't do. Get outside of what Democrats want to talk about and talk about what you want to talk about as a party that actually, that resonates with the hearts of these voters. And it truly did work. And when we had talked about, the socialism message worked, I thought it was interesting. Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez sent out a tweet recently, and she said, let me give it to you here. No, maybe I'm not going to be able to give it to you, but
I was just going to say that something that I've been hearing a lot from friends on campus and from liberal friends of mine in general is that, we have done that. Latino community has been fear mongered by Republicans about socialism, and that they're not actually offering communism in the way that, you can see it in these other Latin American countries. And that really, we're offering democratic socialist ideals. And as we know, democratic socialism and socialism are the same thing, and they both have really negative effects on countries who implement them. And so I think that that's a good point to bring up, is when they're going to try, and the next year it's going to be, they're just trying to make you afraid. And the truth is, you should be afraid that this is really what they're trying. This is really what they're offering. And we can't let them switch the narrative like that.
So it is an example that is Democrat socialism is like clean coal. There's nothing but coal. Coal is not clean. And socialists aren't Democrats. They're socialists. There's no such thing as clean coal, and there's no such thing as Democrat socialism. And this is what Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said. She said, is anyone archiving these Trump sycophants for which they try to downplay or deny their complicity in the future? I foresee decent probability of many deleted tweets, writings, photos in the future. So she wants to have a list of Trump supporters. By the way, there's 70 million of us who voted for President Trump. And does she want to have a list so she can send us to re-education camps? Does she want to have a kill list, a no work list? This is communist stuff. This is crazy stuff. And this is the very reason why Democrats who were projected to pick up seats in the House actually lost seats. Republicans have picked up, Republicans will pick up anywhere from 7 to 14 seats in the House, which is unique because Nancy Pelosi is going to have a much thinner margin. I know how hard this is because I was in the House when we had a thin margin, and you tried to watch John Boehner or Paul Ryan navigate the different factions of the Republican Party in the majority. And it was hard because you had the Freedom Caucus, very conservative, mission-driven, but then you had other Republicans who helped you make up your majority, that gave you the speakership and the leadership in the House, but they come from really moderate districts, and they couldn't be like the Freedom Caucus. They had to be far more, nuanced in some of the things they voted for, and to remedy the difference between the Freedom Caucus and the moderates. And not, by the way, not that all the moderates wanted to be moderate, but that's where their districts were. It was really hard to find compromise. And when Boehner or Ryan couldn't do that, they had to go to Nancy Pelosi to get the votes. Now with Nancy might have an 8, 5, 10 person majority, and having a really tough reelection in 22 because Joe Biden, in the first off-year election, the party in the presidency usually gets crushed. They're going to have a difficult time navigating that thin majority in the House. But they didn't win seats on socialism. They lost. The Republicans, against all the polling odds, actually are picking up seats. Not one Republican in the House lost their seat.
So it was a really bad night for Democrats and for Nancy.
Well, not only that, think about this. The amount of money that was spent, not just on the Congress, I mean, hundreds of millions of dollars. And by the way, Democrats spend way more money than Republicans, probably twice as much when you look at how much Democrats raise in their campaigns. But how much
really the Wall Street candidates that they always talk about.
Yeah, right. And if you look at where did Wall Street give the money? It was to Joe Biden and the Democrats, right? Not to Republicans. But also the outside money was massive. I mean, Bloomberg spent $100 million in the last week of the campaign. And by the way, he did that in 2018 and helped flip a lot of these seats. He did it this time. It didn't flip any seats. But they also spent hundreds of millions of dollars to flip legislatures, state legislatures, state bodies. And the reason they wanted to do that, Evita, was because this is 2020. And every 10 years, you do redistricting. Right. So they wanted to flip these seats, these chambers in states, so they could rewrite the maps for Assembly, Senate, and House districts. They didn't flip one House chamber with all that money spent. That's how bad it was for Democrats. Money couldn't buy them success. Now, I think maybe a little fraud bought them success in beating Donald Trump, but they couldn't use that fraud to take out Republicans in state offices or in the Congress. Right.
So with that, I was going to conclude this podcast.
Sorry, I've been talking way too much. Sorry about that.
No, good. Very insightful. So we have a lot of hope for the future. I think especially with the Latino vote, with a lot of these minorities, I think that there's a lot of hope for the upcoming elections.
And by the way, as long as Republicans do a good job of reaching out and working for votes, I think we do have a bright future.
Conveying their message, using their own narrative, and not playing to the games of the Democrats.
I know this is one last thing, but Evita's mom, my wife Rachel, will always talk about, once you vote for a Republican once, it's easier to do it again. And her dad in 1980 voted for Ronald Reagan, first time. Came from a Democrat family, but he was in the military and loved Reagan, voted for Reagan, and since then has never gone back to the Democrat Party. All his kids, I think all of his grandkids, are all Republicans. Yeah. So what happened? Republicans can grow.
Latino family that switched.
We flipped it.
Yep, and that can happen again.
We can do more flipping, and that's how we win in America. So, listen, this isn't over. We're going to have recounts all in Wisconsin and in Georgia. We're going to look at what happened in Pennsylvania, specifically Philly, and what happened with the voting machines in Michigan. And I think we all have to hang out and wait for that to happen before we sit and say that Joe Biden is the president-elect. We'll come back with more, though, and talk about that as this develops, right?
Right. Till next time.
See you guys later.